Hi, welcome to Rekindle XM, where we talk about workplace stress, burnout, and effective ways to recover from ashes of burnout and rekindle our fire. I'm your host, Masha, and I'm joined today by Brian and Michelle and our very special guest, Taylor Minshall. Before we begin, I'd like you to stay connected with us by subscribing or following our channel. All right, today we have a very special guest, and he's here to show. What?
You forgot
Do
the
I need to start
shameless
over?
plug. No.
Oh, you want me to do that? Okay.
Yes, we
Start
always
over.
have to do the shameless. No, you don't have to start over. This is all going in. Shameless
Oh,
plug
okay,
plug.
fine. Shameless plug. We just got a contract from our publisher, Morgan James. We've been praying about that for quite some time. How's that, Brian? Approved. Yay. All right. With no further ado, Taylor, welcome to our podcast. Thanks so much for being here. We're so excited to hear your burnout story. A little bit about Taylor. He is an attorney focused on business law, civil litigation, and estate law. Taylor lives in Colorado and enjoys spending time with his family and friends, traveling, and contributing to faith-based community. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, to begin with, is there anything else you want to tell our audience about you? And then share your lifestyle, your professional life. We are eager to know what led you to burnout and then hear your burnout story.
Absolutely. Well, I don't think burnout is something that's uncommon or unfamiliar in the legal profession. Many attorneys are known for putting in way too many hours and not having great work-life balance. The legal profession is interesting. It's one of those professions that has not only a high burnout rate, but also high rates of substance abuse, of divorce, and just an imbalanced work-life, basically an imbalanced life when it comes to work-life balance. So it's one of those professions where it hits the hardest and people really struggle with maintaining that. So my story is interesting. I've been practicing in private practice as an attorney for 8 years. And I hit burnout in my fourth year, actually, between the third and fourth year of my private practice. At that time, I had climbed the ranks from an associate attorney to a managing attorney of a local law firm that had a regional presence in 5 states. While managing the office, I was overseeing over 4,000 cases. We practiced creditors' rights. We represented most of the large banks that you can think of. And it was a very high volume practice and very busy, a lot of hours. And during that time, I just didn't have enough hours in a day. So naturally, my work bled into the weekend. And I found myself working Saturdays. I found myself working Sundays. I found myself coming home and working evenings after work during the week. And I just really didn't have work-life balance. I also noticed that I started not engaging in the activities that I used to really enjoy that help keep me balanced, like working out, spending time with family and friends. And when I started not engaging in those activities and prioritizing the things that bring me balance, and I gave more and more time to work and work and work, I quickly became unbalanced and unhappy. And it really culminated at a point in 2020 where I had this particular weekend, I had worked about 10 hours on a Saturday. And I was just stressed. And I remember even articulating and saying out loud that day, I hate what I do. I hate this. I hate what I do. And yet I'm doing it anyway. I really was basically a slave to my profession. And I was a slave to my job. And I cut out all the things that were meaningful for me. Consequently, it even diminished my faith during that point too. Something else that I would engage in frequently would help keep me balanced, spending time in prayer and reading the Bible. It started to ebb away at that and eat at that, where I lost interest in that or just didn't even want to try anymore. So it really kind of took over to the point where I was oppressed. I was depressed. I was really enslaved to this and felt hopeless, and really hated what I did to the point where I even would articulate, I hate what I do. When people ask, so do you enjoy it? I'm like, no, I hate it. I really do hate it. And it was bizarre. People wondered, like, well, why are you doing it? And I'm like, well, the money's good, but I hate what I do. And I think that actually speaks to a lot of people, especially in the United States, who are doing something that they're not passionate about. Yeah, they hate, and yet they do it anyway because of the money because we have student loans, we have bills. You've become accustomed to a certain lifestyle that you probably don't need to live. And in order to fuel that, you got to basically enslave yourself and trade that time for money. So that's where I was. And so coming back to that Saturday where I'd worked for 10 hours that day, I remember I shut the laptop in the evening and I said, I just need to unplug. So I called and I had a friend come up and said, hey, do you want to join me for dinner? My daughter was not home that evening. My twin brother was also out that evening. And I didn't want to just be by myself. And I said I needed somebody to talk to or else I knew I'd keep working. So I had a friend come over, join me for dinner. Within the first few minutes of sitting down and having dinner, I knew something was off. And I told my friend, I said, hey, something's wrong. I said, my hearing just went out and my vision's going dim. And that's the last memory I had. And apparently what I tried to do was stand up from sitting at the kitchen table. And apparently I was trying to take a step to go lie down on the couch. And mid-step, without any notice that I was going to lose consciousness, I took a step and apparently lost consciousness. I woke up in the emergency room at Denver General Hospital, where I lived at the time in Denver. And from prior medical experience, I realized I was in an ER and was wondering, how did I get here? What am I doing here? And at the time, they were suturing my lip and saying, well, that's going to scar. I said, okay, what's going on? Right. And then they informed me that I lost consciousness in my house. I had fallen mid-step and had multiple facial fractures, broke my nose, broke the orbital, which is the bone right behind the eye that kind of elevates it as a platform, broke all these facial bones around the eye, had so basically skull fracture, facial fractures, and I had a brain bleed. So it was pretty serious. And had I been alone and that happened, there's a good probability I could have bled out. Head wounds typically have a lot of bleeding, and I had several lacerations as well from just face planting on a marble floor. And they ran a number of tests. I had to have 3 surgeries in total, reconstructive facial surgeries. I've got 9 plates and 16 screws in my face. The MRI and the CAT scan makes me look like Frankenstein. It's wild.
You're as close as it gets to an Iron Man, and we're so happy that you had that calling to invite a friend, and God is great. He had somebody with you, knowing that there would be a medical emergency. So
That's right.
praying that you're well.
That's right. Thank you. And they ran a number of tests, and at the end of the day, they couldn't find any underlying cause, not epilepsy, no tumors, nothing that could really explain what happened. So they chalked it up to stress. And they said, well, they said, well, what led up to it? And I explained, I said, yeah, this was stress. Stress actually can do this. This is your subconscious. And it was interesting. The neurologist shared this with me. She said, the best way to think about it is you even articulated, you even verbalized and said out loud, I hate what I'm doing. And yet you were still doing it. And she said, it's almost like your subconscious, which was in the back seat, got out, took your conscious, put your conscious aside, and took the wheel and drove and literally made you fall on your face, telling you, stop doing this. This is hurting you. And it was interesting when she shared that. And then soon after, I read a really interesting verse in the Bible where it talked about Jesus being a stumbling block, a stumbling stone. And it's something I read before, but never quite could appreciate until now. And I realized, wow, it causes you to stumble and fall on your face. Better to fall on your face and be broken, and if you're off track, off the path you should be living, to, repent and return on the path you should be, living righteously. And if you don't fall on your face, better to fall on your face than to be broken and crushed, later. And it almost the analogy is like you're running straight towards a cliff, right? And better to trip and stumble and fall and get back up rather than keep running off the cliff. So it was interesting. I read that verse too. I was like, wow, I literally had to stumble and fall and break my face, just like this verse says, rather than get crushed later in life had I continued on that path. And so I thought that was really interesting. And in terms of, corrective action, what do I do after this? I quickly realized, okay, I need to listen to my body. I knew I was doing something I hated doing. I kept doing it anyway. I have no work-life balance. So something needs to give, something needs to change. So I immediately pulled back from that position and started carving out the time for work-life balance, started getting back. Well, actually, I couldn't work out for, about a year. With the brain bleeds and all that, I couldn't do a lot of physical activity for quite a while. So I wasn't able to do that, but I got back to what I knew, which was plugging in, praying, reading the Bible. And one of the main things that's really helped me is going back to what I've always known, which is honoring the Sabbath. Turns out the way we're designed and created, our bodies need a break. They need a rest. We weren't designed to work 7 days a week. We were designed to work no more than 6 days a week and then rest at least one day out of the week. And when I went back to honoring the Sabbath and saying, okay, thank you for that gift, I'm actually going to listen and receive it and not work for at least one day a week. And turns out, you can recharge your brain, your body, your mind, spirit, soul, etc. It just recharges everything and recalibrates, resets it for you when you actually follow through and observe the Sabbath. So I started getting back into that even before I could work out. And it brought back so much balance. I wasn't working evenings anymore. I wasn't working, weekends, and brought me peace. I had depression before and oppression, and brought me peace. And it was just a wonderful way to recalibrate spiritually, psychologically, and physically. And all three of those components are intertwined, right? So if there's an off balance, you need to fix all three. And once you do, usually all three spheres are addressed simultaneously. So that's exactly what I did. I just got back to what I knew. Resumed, my faith practice that I knew kept me centered, and honored that Sabbath. And then as soon as I could, I started enjoying those activities and resuming physically working out, spending time with family and friends, and just realized that I got to set boundaries, guardrails going forward so I don't get back into that same situation. And so now I'm mindful of that. Even though I work a lot, I'll still work evenings during the week, but not every evening. And I don't work weekends now. So I've had to just set some hard guardrails so I don't get back in that same place. But the other thing is carving out the time for what matters. Giving the first part of my day, the best part of my day, to carving out, priority one, which is spiritually, making time with God, spending time in prayer and reading the Bible every day. Cross that off the list first. Then you can begin the workday, right? And then in the evening is time with family and friends. So I can cover all those bases and all those priorities without becoming unbalanced. So that's kind of what I've learned. That's how I got into the mess I was in. It's how I got there, and then that was the way out. And following that model, I've had much more. I can say now I've got work-life balance. I'm happy. I have peace. My needs are met. I don't make any less money than what I was making before by not working as much. So it's almost like productivity increases when you're balanced. Mm-hmm. You don't have to work as much, right? And yet the gains are there. The productivity is there. The income is there. And most importantly, you're balanced spiritually, psychologically, and physically. So it was a learning process. Unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way. But I share this story with you guys so that others who hear this will not have to. You don't have to go through all the trauma and everything that I went through to learn it. A wise person learns from the mistakes of others. So that's really the hope here, is that others will hear from that story and similar stories and realize, if I'm not living a balanced life, I don't want to have what happened to me. I don't want to lose consciousness and break my face and learn the hard way. So hopefully it's insightful and helpful and encourages other people to really prioritize that work-life balance.
And luckily, we learn from stories. We, doctors happen, and attorneys, and we happen to be the worst patients, the educated individuals who say, oh, I have a career, I have bills to pay. They deprioritize their health. And kind of going back to the beginning and asking some questions about the lifestyle and professional life, you said very clearly, I hate what I do. Mm-hmm. Yet, yep. Your purpose and your calling is to be an attorney. So was it, I hate what I do, I hate being an attorney, or I hate my current lifestyle, I love what I do as an attorney, but this professional chaos is not serving me anymore? Which one was it?
Actually, aspects of both. So at the time, the whole reason I went into law was to help people. That's actually the reason most attorneys go into law, is to help people, right? Similar to folks in the medical field, they want to help. The issue was, the reason I was so unhappy at the time is I wasn't representing people. I was representing the largest banks you can think of in North America. And I was making them a lot of money. And it wasn't gratifying at all. It wasn't satisfying at all. all I was doing was making banks money. And I was sitting there thinking, well, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't why I went into this. I'm not happy. I came to help people. And, I would have people that would ask me, oh, can you help with this? Can you help with that? And based on the terms of my representation with these banks and with my firm, with my employment agreement, I wasn't allowed to do outside work. So I had to turn away friends and family all the time because I wasn't allowed to do side work or outside work. I was only able to represent those banks. So it made me very unhappy. I was not satisfied. I didn't enjoy what I did. And without having that satisfaction of helping people and living out my purpose, using my gifts, skills, and talents to help other people and being passionate about what I do, without that, like I said, I felt oppressed. I felt enslaved. And there's no gratification. I was just making banks money. And I was the guy suing a lot of these people, that had no money, that had to go into bankruptcy or whatever. And it wasn't gratifying.
Taylor, that's interesting that you were in the right field, but the wrong particular job. I think that happens to a lot of people because, Masha and I, obviously Masha had her own business and she went into healthcare. I've been in healthcare my entire career. And I don't think that's unusual to realize you're in the right field, but that's not quite the right fit for that career. But I'm kind of curious if you said to yourself, I hate my job. Were there warning signs? Was this something that happened slowly that you realized, or were you ignoring any warning signs that could have told you, hey, I'm not in this isn't the right fit for me, and this is of course hindsight, but what are your thoughts on that? Because I think this happens to a lot of people. You're in the right field but the wrong job.
Yeah, were there red flags early on that I wasn't enjoying what I was doing? Sure. But I was getting good experience in that particular practice. I got a lot of trial practice experience, which was really helpful early on in your career. Most associate attorneys don't get that unless you're like in criminal law and you're a prosecutor or a public defender. You don't get a whole lot of trial practice experience, a lot of courtroom experience. Usually they have you chained to a desk in a basement. You're just doing research or drafting pleadings. And I wanted trial practice experience, right? So it was a trade-off. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do long-term, but I knew it was a temporary trade-off. I'd get a lot of trial practice experience. But I think the stress really started to hit me when I went into management. When I took over as managing attorney, that was next level because now I'm wearing my manager hat on top of my attorney hat. And you're mentoring and training new attorneys and support staff, dealing with internal administrative issues, and constantly, interfacing with the management within the firm, but also the general counsel and the management with these large national banks. So it was a lot of responsibility, it was a lot of work, it was a lot of stress, and it was a very different role in management than it was just as an associate attorney. So that's kind of really what shifted as well, was taking on a higher role.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, because I think that happens to a lot of people as they take on a bigger role. All of a sudden, there is more responsibility. You start to let go of the things that you love, that are healthy.
Absolutely.
Brian, it looks like you were going to ask something, so I want to call you out.
No, there's a lot of your story that is very similar to mine, and I wonder if that's more how men view and handle stress and lead to burnout versus women, because that was one of the first things that affected me in my burnout. Was I did start to lose my connection to my faith. I was leading Bible studies and stuff like that, and then I got burned out in my faith first, and then I started losing my connection with my community. So it'd be interesting to see as we go along whether this tends to be a more male versus female thing, or just it can happen to anybody.
I think that's a great.
Go ahead.
It's a great point, Brian, because I think just the way men are made up, right? Men and women are made very differently, right? We have different gifts, skills, talents. Men, I think, I'll speak for myself, but also just generally, just a general observation. I think most men, are almost ingrained in culture and society, to just be tough, get through it, figure it out, get through it, And I think because of that, we probably tend to internalize a lot more of that and have a harder time saying, hey, I need some help. This isn't working. I think we're generally, men, I think will more so just pull up your bootstraps and figure it out. Just keep moving, right? Trudge along. I think more men are like that, where we'll internalize stress, we'll internalize those feelings and really hold it in and not say, hey, I need help. We have a harder time being vulnerable, I think is the easiest way to say it. We have a harder time being vulnerable and saying, hey, I need help. I think women may not have almost that same expectation societally to show, they can show weakness easier. I think for guys, it's harder to show weakness and say, hey, I need help. I'm in over my head here. I'll get through it. I'll figure it out. I'll handle it. Right. I can do this. So I think that's one interesting distinction just between men and women from my own life experience. I think women tend to be more receptive to being vulnerable and just saying, hey, I'm in over my head. I need help. Whereas guys, I can do it myself. I don't need help. I'm a guy,
Tay, I
my
think
dad
you
says he's
referenced.
never stressed, so I don't believe him when he tells me that, but he says he's never been really stressed out or really stressful, which I know is not true because he's went through a divorce and I saw him in that. And I don't think he's referencing that as part of he's never been stressful. But at work, there's been stressful situations and I'd be totally stressed out because we work together. And he'd be like, I'm not stressed. And I just never believed him. And so you're right. I think that there is some of that. And it's also interesting. You're the second guy that has had that type of thing where they've, like Masha and you, where their physical functions have just stopped. And we're going to be interviewing this guy later on, but he was laid out on his bed and he couldn't move. I think it was a couple months before he could start doing activities again. So you never hear these stories until I've never heard any of these stories until we started trying to work this out ourselves. And then you start talking to people and it's like, wow, I know I had my issues, but I hadn't reached a point of that level of burnout. So this needs to get out there. So I'm glad you're talking with us today.
Absolutely. When I think a lot of attorneys, anyway, I can speak for attorneys, usually will hand it one of two ways. Either when they're super stressed like this, it's escapism, right? So that's where they get into substance abuse, right? And drinking is very prolific in the legal community, unfortunately. And I was actually surprised, even starting out in law school. Yeah, even starting out in law school, it was weird. I noticed that most of the student activities all centered around drinking. Most of them. It kind of threw me. I was like, wow, they're almost like they're conditioning you that this is normal. This is how you deal with it. Even though they tell you the opposite in school, like we should, this is a problem and we shouldn't deal with stress and problems by relying on substances. But yet, even though they were saying that, but in practice, all of our student events that were social were typically involved alcohol. So that was just an interesting observation. And that is a major struggle for a lot of attorneys is substance abuse. So that's either one way to deal with it is escapism. With substances, or two, internalizing it and just not dealing with it, just trying to work through it until, or both simultaneously, until your body talks to you. And for me, I've never struggled with addiction, but or substance abuse, anything like that. Just wasn't drawn to it. But God gets my attention when I'm off path with my health. I've had 3 times in my life where He's had to get my attention through my health, something I could not control. Whereas addiction is something you can kind of control, right? You have the will to put something into your body, whereas with your health, you have no say.
Well, with addiction, you have control until you don't.
Exactly. Yeah, good distinction. Yeah.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And Minshall, I think you were going to comment something, and then I have something I wanted to tie this up with as well.
I know there are so many questions. I wish we could just keep going, but I do want to go back to the faith aspect because I feel like in the faith community, and this is probably true in other realms as well, like maybe, in groups that are very successful, we think we should be immune to anxiety and stress. And if you're in the faith community, we're supposed to put our faith in God, we shouldn't be worrying about things, but that's often not the actual reality. So what would you say to other people, particularly who feel like, oh, I'm too strong to struggle with stress and anxiety. This isn't, I can handle this. What would you say to people who have that view, or who think, I shouldn't be struggling with it because I'm supposed to have faith in God?
To that point, I mean, my personal view is this. If you've got anxiety, you've got a lot of stress, and you feel overwhelmed, like you can't do it, press in. That's the time where you need help. That's the time to hit the help button, right? And I found in my personal experience, it doesn't mean you're not going to be stressed. No, you're still going to encounter struggles and trials and testing, right? Professionally, in your personal life, in your spiritual life, you're going to encounter all that. If you're not, you're probably doing it wrong, right? So you are going to encounter all those things as part of the human experience. But the question is, how do you respond? How do you deal with it? And I found that constantly just hitting that help button, my daily help button, which for me and my faith is God, right? Is praying every day, getting in scripture every day, feeding my spirit, feeding my soul. When I have that, I do have strength to overcome. And declaring God's word for me has been very helpful. It's interesting. You see a lot of motivational speakers that kind of emulate pastors, and you see pastors that emulate motivational speakers. But really what I hit on is I read God's word and I declare it over myself. So, all right, if this is what he said, and this is who he says I am, and this is what he says I can do, I declare it and I speak it and I put it into practice. I believe it, right? And it does give you the strength to overcome. It also gives you wisdom, though, too. It gives you wisdom to reflect on what I did wrong in the past. And when I cut myself off, like Brian was saying, when I cut myself off spiritually, everything else just unraveled too. And conversely, as soon as I realigned spiritually, psychologically, I came back. I wasn't depressed anymore. I wasn't oppressed. I wasn't stressed. I didn't have anxiety. I could sleep again. I had peace again. So it's just interesting how we're wired. We're psychological, spiritual, physical beings. And you can't address one leg without addressing the other two. They're all interconnected. And so for me, when I realigned spiritually, it helped me realign psychologically and physically. And so for folks who would say, I don't need that. I think that's disingenuous. You're kind of just lying to yourself or deceiving yourself, because all three of those aspects are intertwined. That's just how we're designed. It's how we're made.
The mind, the body, and the spirit come as one. Yeah,
that's right.
Three as one. Tay, you mentioned something that made me think of a couple of things. One is feeling enslaved, feeling trapped, that deception of golden handcuffs and the iron cage. The door is wide open, but we're cuffed inside.
That's right.
And to me, it's a mindset game. It is the cultural conditioning. You have to have the best car. You have to have the best roof over your head. You have to work hard until you hit retirement, and then it will be provided for you. We live in a different world today. And I can also relate to what you were saying earlier, that men process things differently and don't want to show their vulnerability. But I want to challenge that a little bit, because I also felt the superhero syndrome, right? That's what it is. I can do everything. I need no one. I got this under control. If I need help, I'll ask for it. But we don't ask for help. In my situation, it is being the single mother and having the world on my shoulders. Of course, a topic we're going to talk in a different venue, but to relate is, I think there is a point in time in our lives where we make a choice. Do we start walking away from things that we know that are comfortable but are challenging into the space that is unknown and maybe have a little less and live a little more simply? But that tug of war, I think, is real for most. And most of us who have experienced that definition, that worldly definition of success, is having a lot of everything and having no need and having all the shiny things and the recent shiny things and exchange the old shiny things for new shiny things, right? When you get a taste of that, it's hard for people to change the mindset and say, well, do I really need it? Do I really want to be enslaved to it, to pay for it for as long as it requires me to? Or do I want something more simpler, more peaceful? So my question to you is kind of piggyback on what Minshall said. When you had that mindset of a superhero, are there symptoms that you may have experienced that you ignored because you were, on that path of, hey, I'm a successful attorney. I'm going to show how it's done. I'm going to make this happen. Is there anything that you ignored? Like, for instance, did you lose sleep early on? Did you start over caffeinating yourself during the day? Like, what cycle do you recognize that you may have ignored when those symptoms started to show up physically and cognitively for you before you literally fell on your face on the marble floor?
Yes, so loss of sleep was absolutely one of them. And reason you can't sleep is you can't turn your brain off, right? And those are elevated cortisol levels, which, you may be familiar with. Cortisol is your fight or flight response, right? That's your adrenaline. And so your mind is constantly thinking, there's a lion in the room. I can't turn it off. I can't sleep. And you're constantly in that fight or flight mode. So it robs you of your sleep. When you're stressed like that, you're anxious, it robs you of your quality time with friends and family. I recall numerous times, even though I was with family or friends, and even in a group dynamic, I was checked out. My mind wasn't there. I was thinking about all the things I had to do tomorrow, worrying about that. And I couldn't enjoy the quality of time with them, engage with them. It even robbed me of that. It robbed me of the things I enjoyed doing. I became depressed, became oppressed. And so those were all the physiological symptoms. You could just feel the stress. You could feel the adrenals just constantly released. You could feel the heart racing, the lack of sleep, all those things. Sure, I could feel those. But over time, my brain just kind of created a new baseline, a new normal, new homeostasis, and just said, okay, well, I guess this is it. This is life now. This is what it's like to be an attorney, and I just assumed that everybody's doing this. And, when you talk to most of my colleagues in the legal community, they were all feeling the same. So I just assumed that this is how it is, right? Especially if you're a civil litigator. If you're in civil litigation, it's kind of a different practice. It's very reactive. It can be very intense, high stress typically, high stakes typically. And most of my colleagues are all civil litigators, right? So you talk to most of them, and that's life for most of them. So you just realize, okay, I guess this is it. This is what it is. Not really. And so we all kind of step into this delusion that this is the new normal when it's really not. It's not what it was meant to be.
Did you realize that new normal before your burnout or after? Because I think that's the issue, is people don't realize that as you get further into long-term stress and further into burnout, that new normal, because we've talked about it in other episodes, and it's in our book as well, that new normal just keeps going down until you don't have any ability, your brain doesn't have any ability to recover. So I'm curious on whether you noticed it before or after.
It was a gradual thing, right? It's kind of like the frog being boiled in the hot water pot, right? Slowly it's turning up, and you just kind of, you'll muster through, power through, but you don't realize that the water is boiling until you look back and go, oh my gosh, the water's boiling. I don't think I really realized it was a sudden creep. And I think that's why it's so destructive, is it's not that stark. If I realized it was boiling, I would have jumped out, right? But it wasn't like that. It grew on me gradually. And I think I didn't really become fully aware and appreciate it until I fell and broke my face, blacked out. And then I realized, wow, I'd been in a pot of boiling water for a long time, and my body finally just had to say stop. And I think it was a God thing, really allowed me to fall and be humbled and break my face, and allowed me to recalibrate after that, and then heal spiritually, psychologically, physically. And going through that whole process, it gave me a lot of perspective. And then I realized, wow, that's how I got here, and I had to be broken. If I didn't, who knows? Before that, I had a chronic heart issue, mitral valve prolapse. Combined with elevated levels of cortisol and heart palpitations is not a good combination.
Especially somebody your age.
Yes.
Because we don't recover from heart attacks.
That's right. And there's attorneys in their 30s, guys, who die of heart attacks and strokes.
Were you drinking a lot of caffeine at that time too?
The interesting thing is I was only drinking tea, not coffee at that time.
Well, it is still caffeine unless you're not drinking caffeinated tea. It's just
green tea is caffeine, not as much as coffee, right? So I was trying to avoid that pitfall, knowing that, hey, this is only going to hurt me. And I had seen some naturopaths who recommended some different herbs to help address that, and they also said stay away from coffee. But I don't know that made a huge difference at the time, because your mindset is incredibly powerful. So even if you're supplements to help address that. I'm not saying don't, but I'm saying that my mindset was almost so strong that it didn't matter what I what I took or what I was putting into my body at that point. When you're that chronically stressed and you've got adrenaline flowing through your veins every day, naturally over time it's going to wear down your body.
This conversation made me think about, there was an engineer I worked with when I was doing some stuff in Las Vegas, and he ended up, I think he had a heart attack, but he was doing nothing but drinking coffee all day, and he wasn't drinking any water. And so when you're that stressed out and you're drinking caffeine, which actually keeps the cortisol running and doesn't let your body function normally. There's a lot of bad things about caffeine if you're not paying attention to it. Well, I can't say I was any better because I still don't like to drink water. But when you're really stressed out and you're not doing at least enough water and some other things, then that just amplifies the effects too.
That's right. Yeah, when you're not taking care of yourself, you're not eating well, you're not resting well, not staying hydrated, you're absolutely right. It has a ripple effect.
So Taylor, we heard you talk about the need for rest, and it's interesting because if you look out, or if you look up burnout recovery, this is what they will talk about first is rest, and you've talked about that Sabbath rest. So what does that look like for you now? What do you are there certain other forms of rest? Do you make sure you get a certain amount of sleep? You take a Sabbath rest? What do you do on the Sabbath then to really recover?
You bet. So I do not work at all. I do no work for at least 24 hours from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. It comes from the first book of the Bible in Genesis. God worked 6 days and rested the seventh, so I do the same thing. So no work at all on the seventh day. I just rest. I enjoy that time with family, with friends, doing things I enjoy doing. I get to sleep in. Normally during the week, I wake up at 4:30 in the morning. On the weekend, on the Sabbath, I'll sleep in. Sleeping in for me can be like 7 o'clock.
I was going to ask you that. What does sleeping in look like for somebody like you? 7 o'clock. Okay.
But it's
what time do you go to bed?
Well, normally during the week, I get in bed about 8:30.
Nice.
Yeah.
So sundown. And that talks about the resetting your circadian rhythm, and it has to do with the sunrise and the sunset. So when we are in extremely stressful situations and we can't sleep, the best thing that we can do is first thing in the morning, go outside for a little bit. If it's too cold, get a cup of tea and stand on the sunshine or observe the beauty of the morning. And similarly, the same thing in the evening. When it's time to wind down, train your body to go outside and enjoy the sunset. Those are my two favorite times of the day. Of course, it took me a while to get to enjoy the sunrise because of similar burnout story where, I would stay up too late and sleep in as long as I possibly can. And the stress cycle just keeps going on until you physically interrupt it because it's not going to end on its own. Are there any other mindful practices that you have to help you on this healthy marathon when you do recognize that work stress is getting a little bit more intense? How do you overcompensate for that to balance out, to bring back to that work-life balance homeostasis?
You bet. Yeah. So first thing is spiritually. When I'm recalibrated spiritually, which is spending daily time in prayer and reading the Bible for me, that's the first step. Number two is getting adequate sleep. So I shoot for at least 8 hours. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's my goal is 8 hours. And then also staying active, working out, ideally at least 5 times a week. And by the way, Michelle, when you asked what I did on Shabbat, I would also take a rest physically on Shabbat and just allow my mind, body, spirit just to have complete rest. And that way I can compartmentalize the week and differentiate the week and the kind of good stresses, the eustress as well as the regular stress of the week, set it apart from the Sabbath. So the Sabbath is a complete rest, mind, body, and soul.
So important.
Absolutely.
Well,
and real quick, it looks like I'm about to, my battery is about to die if I don't get a charger, so I might need to pause and go grab that.
And I was going to suggest that unless there are any more last minute questions, any tips, Taylor, that you want to give to our fellow listeners, any any struggle that they may be facing and making the decision where it says, I have to work overtime, and in a salary world, you don't pay it extra for it and get recognized for it.
Yep.
Versus how do you learn to say that no and establish your boundaries to have a good, peaceful, established work-life balance? How do you stay true to that?
I think the key is this. God has given every single person their own unique gifts, skills, talents, and abilities and life experiences for a reason. Every single person has them. And every single person has them to contribute to the rest of humanity. That's how this all works. So my recommendation is pursue your passions. You're passionate about certain things, and those things should align with your gifts, skills, and talents and life experience. If you pursue your passions, you're going to work harder, you're going to be more productive and effective, you're going to impact others and be able to share those gifts, skills, and talents with others without avoiding burnout, because it's a passion. It doesn't feel so much like work, even though it is work. You're going to do better and be more successful in the end, and you're going to be more balanced. So that's really, I think, my takeaway is pursue your passion. And by the way, once I moved out of representing banks and I started representing people, it's still work, right? There's still stressful moments, but there's also the satisfaction of impacting people's lives. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to be able to help somebody and to look at somebody's face and their eyes after you've helped them and change the course of their life completely. It's very gratifying. So pursue your passions, use the gifts, skills, and talents and abilities that God's given you to help other people.
I could have not said it better myself. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and lessons learned. It's always it's a challenging thing to do, but it is a huge gift and a blessing to others when we share our own experiences. And what did we learn? What could we do better? What are we doing better today to keep ourselves out of those hospital beds and enjoying the life? Because every day we have a choice to live or not. So what is it going to be for you? Thanks again, Taylor, for joining us. Until next time, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe. And if you found this content enjoyable, please leave a comment. Thank you.